The warning lights came first, red flashes that painted Commander's face in the color of blood. She stood at the center of the Korean Space Command bridge, watching her screens fill with impossible numbers. 17 colony worlds had gone silent in the past 6 hours. 17 human settlements, home to over 2 billion people, simply stopped responding. "Commander, we have confirmed visual," her communications officer said, his voice shaking. "The Empire, they're here." Had heard stories about her entire life. Every child in the galaxy knew about them. They were creatures standing 8 feet tall with armored shells and 4 arms that ended in sharp claws. For 10,000 years they had moved through the galaxy like a plague. They conquered over 400 species. Some they enslaved. Others they simply erased from existence. No one had ever stopped them. No one had ever even slowed them down. And now 12,000 of their warships hung in the darkness beyond Mars. "All stations battle ready," commanded. Her voice did not shake. She would not let it shake. "Launch all fighters. Activate orbital defense platforms. Send word to Admiral." The next 3 hours were the longest of life. She watched humanity's greatest weapons fire at the fleet. Plasma beams cut through space. Nuclear missiles exploded against energy shields. Rail guns launched metal slugs at incredible speeds, and none of it mattered. The ships absorbed everything humanity threw at them and kept coming. Lieutenant led the 3rd Fighter Squadron toward the enemy formation. He was young, only 26 years old, but he had trained his whole life for this moment. His squadron consisted of 48 pilots, each one the best humanity had to offer. "Stay in formation," ordered through his radio. "Target their smaller ships first. We can." He never finished the sentence. A beam weapon swept across space and cut through his squadron like a blade through paper. In less than 2 seconds, 31 of his pilots died. Their ships exploded into clouds of metal and fire. Watched his friends, his family, his brothers and sisters in arms simply cease to exist. "No," he whispered, then louder, screaming into his radio, "Fall back, everyone, fall back." But there was no falling back. The remaining pilots tried to retreat, but the fighters were faster. They swarmed like angry insects, surrounding the human ships and tearing them apart. Flew like he had never flown before. He dodged beams and missiles. He pushed his ship beyond its limits, and somehow, he survived. When he finally reached the safety of Earth's defensive line, only he and 2 other pilots remained from his squadron of 48. On Earth, Admiral watched the battle from her command center. She was 63 years old with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many wars, but she had never seen anything like this. The orbital defense platforms, massive stations that had taken decades to build, fell one by one. The Mars shipyards where humanity built its greatest vessels burned in the darkness, and still they came. "Admiral," one of her officers called out, "the enemy fleet is broadcasting a message." Closed her eyes for a moment. She knew what was coming. Put it through. The screen flickered, and a commander appeared. Its face was a nightmare of sharp angles and compound eyes. When it spoke, its mandibles clicked together in a way that made skin crawl. "Humans," they said, "you have 2 choices. Surrender now and some of you will live as servants of the Empire. Resist and every single one of you will die. You have 1 hour to decide." The screen went dark. Looked around the room at her officers. Some were crying. Others stared at their screens with empty eyes. They all knew the truth. Humanity's fleet was broken. Only 847 ships remained, scattered and damaged. Against 12,000 warships they had no chance. "Admiral," a young officer asked, "what do we do?" Thought about her. She thought about the billions of people on Earth looking up at the sky and waiting for someone to save them. She thought about every human who had ever lived, every dream they had dreamed, every song they had sung, every child they had loved. "We retreat," she said finally. "Pull all remaining ships to Earth's shadow. We hide, we repair, and we think. We are not surrendering today." Commander received the order on her bridge. She passed it along to her crew, then walked to the large window at the front of her ship. Through the reinforced glass, she could see the fleet approaching. There were so many ships that they blocked out the stars. The darkness seemed to swallow everything. Her first officer, a woman named, came to stand beside her. "Commander," said quietly, "do you think we can win?" Did not answer for a long time. She watched the enemy ships growing larger in the window. She thought about Lieutenant, who had somehow survived the massacre at Mars. She thought about all the pilots who had not survived. She thought about the 17 colony worlds that had gone silent and the billions of people who were now dead or enslaved. "I don't know," finally admitted. "I honestly don't know." "What do we tell the crew?" Turned away from the window, her crew was watching her. These men and women had followed her into battle. They had trusted her with their lives. They deserved something more than despair, but had nothing to give them. No plan, no secret weapon, no words of comfort that weren't lies. "Tell them to rest," she said. "Tell them to eat something and sleep if they can. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next. Tonight we survive." The crew returned to their duties, moving slowly, like people walking through a dream. Stayed at the window, watching the fleet settle into orbit around Earth. The enemy ships spread out in a formation that covered half the sky. Their weapon systems pointed down at the planet below, ready to burn everything to ash. Somewhere on Earth, children were going to sleep. Parents were holding their families close. Old people were remembering better days. None of them knew what was coming. None of them could imagine that this might be humanity's last night. Sat alone in the hangar bay of his carrier ship. His fighter was damaged but still functional. Around him, repair crews worked on the surviving ships, trying to patch holes and replace burned-out systems. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. He thought about the pilots he had lost. He remembered their faces, their names, their jokes and dreams. Pilot who had wanted to open a restaurant after the war. Pilot Minu who had just become a father. Pilot Sara who could make anyone laugh even in the darkest moments. All gone, all dead in the cold silence of space. Looked down at his hands, they were shaking. He clenched them into fists, trying to make them stop. He was a soldier. He was supposed to be strong, but in that moment he felt like a child lost in a storm. Above Earth, they waited. Their hour deadline passed, but they did not attack. They wanted humanity to suffer. They wanted people to feel the weight of despair crushing their spirits. They had done this many times before with other species. First came fear. Then came surrender. Then came slavery. But they did not know something important. They did not know about a secret buried deep beneath the Korean peninsula. They did not know about 40 years of hidden research and desperate hope. They did not know that humanity was about to show them something new. In the darkness of that terrible night, while the enemy waited and humanity trembled, a message was sent. It traveled through secure channels to Commander's personal device. The message was simple, just a few words from someone she had never met. "We have something, come alone." And in those 5 words, the smallest spark of hope began to glow. Traveled alone, just as the message had asked. She took a small shuttle down to Earth's surface, landing in a valley surrounded by mountains. The coordinates led her to what looked like an old farming village, abandoned and forgotten. But when she stepped out of her shuttle, a hidden door opened in the side of a mountain. A young soldier waited for her inside. He did not speak. He simply nodded and led her down into the earth. They walked for a long time. The tunnels went deeper and deeper, past security checkpoints and blast doors that looked strong enough to survive a nuclear explosion. The air grew cooler. The lights grew brighter. And finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a massive underground chamber. Stopped and stared. The chamber was enormous, carved out of solid rock, and filled with technology she had never seen before. Hundreds of workers moved between computer stations and strange machines. But what caught her attention were the ships. 200 of them, lined up in perfect rows, each one sleek and beautiful and unlike anything in humanity's fleet. "Welcome to Project," a voice said. Turned to see an elderly woman walking toward her. The woman was small and thin, with white hair and glasses that made her eyes look too large for her face. But there was something sharp in those eyes, something brilliant and alive. "I am Doctor," the woman said. "I have been waiting 40 years to show someone this." "What is this place?" asked. "What are those ships?" Smiled. It was the smile of someone who had carried a secret for too long and was finally ready to share it. "Those ships are humanity's last hope. Come, let me show you." They walked together through the chamber while explained. 40 years ago, a young scientist had discovered something impossible. She had found a way to fold space itself, to make a ship disappear from one location and appear instantly in another. The technology was dangerous and unstable, but it worked. For 4 decades, and her team had worked in secret, improving the technology and building these ships. "Why did you hide this?" demanded. "If we had these ships, we could have." "Could have what?" interrupted gently. "The technology was not ready. Even now, it is not perfect. Each jump through folded space puts enormous stress on the ship and the pilot. There is a 30% chance of failure with each jump. Failure means death." Felt her heart sink. 30%, that means. That means 1 in 3 pilots will die every time they use the fold drive. "Yes, I know." Eyes were sad but steady. "But what choice do we have now? That will destroy us all. These ships are the only chance we have." They stopped in front of one of the strange fighters. Up close, could see how different it was from normal ships. The hull seemed to shimmer like it was not quite solid. The cockpit was small and cramped, designed for only one pilot. "Show her," called out. A young man climbed into the cockpit. He was tall and thin, with a calm face and steady hands. His name was, and he was the best test pilot in the project. "Watch carefully," he said. Activated his ship. The engine hummed, a sound unlike anything it heard before. Then, in the blink of an eye, the ship vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. Spun around looking for it and found it hovering at the other end of the massive chamber. It had crossed 300 meters in less than a heartbeat. Made the ship vanish again. This time it appeared directly above them, then beside them, then back in its original position. Each jump was instant. Each jump was impossible. "My God," whispered. "Do you understand now?" asked. "They have never seen this technology. Their shields, their weapons, their tactics, everything they know is based on ships that travel through normal space. But our ships don't travel. They simply appear. We can jump inside their formations, behind their shields, directly next to their engines and weapons. We can strike before they even know we're there." His mind raced with possibilities. If we could put these ships in the middle of their fleet, we could destroy their command ships. We could kill their admirals and generals. We could tear them apart from the inside. Nodded. "Yes, that is exactly what I have been planning for 40 years. "But the survival rate," said. "You said 30% failure. You're asking pilots to fly ships that will kill 1 in 3 of them." His face grew serious. "I am not asking anyone to do anything. I am offering a choice. When word of this project reaches our military, there will be calls for volunteers, pilots who understand the risk and choose to take it anyway. I believe there will be many." She was right. The next morning the call went out through what remained of humanity's military. The message was simple and honest. It explained project, explained the technology, explained the risks. It did not promise glory or safety. It simply asked, "Who will fly?" 3,000 volunteers responded in the first hour. They only needed 200. The selection process was fast but careful. They needed pilots who were skilled enough to handle the new ships and brave enough to face the terrible odds. They needed people who understood that they were probably going to die. Sargent was among the first to volunteer. She was 24 years old with short black hair and eyes that had seen too much pain. 2 days ago, they had destroyed her home colony. Her parents, her younger brother, her grandmother who had raised her, all gone in a flash of light. She had nothing left except her skills and her anger. When the selection officer asked her why she wanted to join, his answer was simple. Because someone has to fight back. Because I would rather die trying than live as a slave. Because my family deserves to be remembered by someone who did something, not someone who gave up. She was accepted immediately. Also volunteered. He came to the mountain facility with his hands still shaking and his heart still broken from watching his squadron die. The doctor who examined him said he was not mentally fit for combat. He ignored her and walked into the training room anyway. I lost 45 people at Mars, he told Commander when she tried to stop him. I watched them die and I couldn't save them. Maybe I can't save myself either, but I can damn well try to save everyone else. Looked into his eyes and saw something there. Not madness, not despair, but purpose. A reason to keep fighting even when everything seemed lost. Get on a ship, she said. Show me what you can do. The training was brutal and fast. There was no time for slow learning. They could attack at any moment. Pilots had to master the fold drive in days instead of months. Many failed. Some died in training, their ships tearing apart during unstable jumps. Others broke down mentally, unable to handle the stress of knowing each jump might be their last. But 200 pilots made it through. 200 men and women who were ready to fight, ready to die, ready to show that humanity would not surrender quietly. On the night before the battle, sat in her cockpit alone. She was not checking systems or reviewing plans. She was simply sitting, thinking, remembering. She thought about her brother's laugh, her mother's cooking, her father's strong hands, her grandmother's stories about the old days on Earth. I miss you, she whispered to the empty air. I miss you all so much. She closed her eyes and made a promise. Not to herself, but to the family she had lost. She would make their deaths mean something. She would make the pay for what they had done. And even if she died trying, she would die fighting. For everyone who can't fight back, she said quietly. For everyone who never had a chance, I'm going to show them what humans are made of. Above her, through miles of rock and earth, the fleet waited in the sky. They were confident and cruel, certain that humanity would break. They had conquered 400 species. They had never lost a war. They had no reason to fear these soft, weak creatures called humans. They had no idea what was coming. In her command center, received word that the pilots were ready. She looked at the list of names, 200 people who had chosen to risk everything for a chance at survival. She did not know most of them personally, but she would remember every single name for the rest of her life. Send word to Admiral, she said. Project is active. We attack at dawn. The longest night of human history was about to end, and when the sun rose, the sky would unleash its champions. The sun rose over Earth on what many believed would be humanity's last day. In orbit above the planet, 12,000 warships hung like a dark cloud, blocking out the stars and casting shadows across the land below. Their weapons were armed. Their soldiers were ready. They had waited long enough. The commander broadcast one final message to the human fleet. His compound eyes glittered with contempt as he spoke. Soft creatures, he said, his mandibles clicking together. Your time has ended. You will make excellent slaves for those we allow to live. Surrender now or watch your world burn. Admiral listened to the message from her command ship. She was old and tired, but her voice was steady when she gave her orders. All ships prepare for engagement. We move in 5 minutes. On the surface of Earth, stood in the underground chamber of Project. 200 pilots sat in their cockpits, waiting. The strange shimmer of the fold drive engines filled the air with an electric tension. Every pilot knew the odds. Every pilot had chosen to be here anyway. You know what you have to do, said through the communication system. The conventional fleet will draw their attention. You will strike when they're focused on our ships. Hit their command vessels first. Kill their leaders, create chaos, and remember, every second you survive is a second more for humanity. There was no cheering, no battle cries, just quiet acceptance and iron determination. "Good luck," said, "and thank you." In her cockpit, gripped her controls and waited. Her hands were steady now. The fear was still there, somewhere deep inside, but she had pushed it down below her anger and her grief. She thought about her family one more time. Then she locked those memories away and focused on the mission. Beside her in the next ship did the same. The conventional fleet launched first. 847 human ships rose from Earth's shadow and flew directly toward the Armada. It was suicide, and everyone knew it. But that was the plan. The needed to believe this was humanity's last desperate attack. The commander laughed when he saw the human ships approaching. "Look at them," he said to his officers. "They actually think they can fight us. How entertaining." He ordered his fleet to engage. The battle began with fire and death. Human ships exploded by the dozens as weapons tore through their shields. Plasma beams cut across space. Missiles filled the darkness with brief, bright explosions. Admiral watched from her command ship as her fleet was slowly destroyed. "Hold the line," she ordered, her voice calm despite the destruction around her. "Hold as long as you can." The fleet pressed forward, confident in their victory. Their formation tightened as they moved to surround the human ships. They focused all their attention on the battle in front of them. They never saw what came from behind. 200 lights flickered into existence inside the formation. One moment there was empty space. The next moment there were human ships appearing like ghosts from nowhere. Was among the first to strike. His fold drive carried him directly behind a command ship, so close he could see the details of its hull. He fired everything he had, plasma cannons and missiles pouring into the enemy vessel at point-blank range. The command ship's shields meant nothing at this distance. Its armor crumpled like paper. The ship exploded in a ball of fire, taking 2 smaller vessels with it. Before the could react was gone. He jumped again, appearing next to another command ship. He fired again. Another explosion. Then he jumped again. All around him the other pilots did the same. They appeared, struck, and vanished. They moved through the fleet like phantoms, killing ships that never saw them coming. They tried to fire back, but their weapons hit empty space. By the time they aimed, the human ships were already somewhere else. The commander stared at his displays in disbelief. His ships were dying, and he could not understand why. "What is this?" he screamed at his officers. "What kind of weapons are these?" No one could answer him. Flew through the chaos with perfect focus. She had trained for this. She had prepared for this. Each jump brought her closer to death, but she did not care. She found a carrier, a massive ship that held thousands of enemy fighters. She jumped inside its shield perimeter and fired into its hangar bay. The explosion set off a chain reaction that tore the carrier apart from the inside. She jumped away before the fire could touch her. But not everyone was so lucky. The fold drives were unstable, just as Doctor had warned. Pilot jumped and never appeared again, lost somewhere in folded space. Pilot Myra's ship materialized inside another vessel, killing her instantly. Pilot's drive failed mid-jump, tearing his ship in half. One by one, the pilots fell. But for every pilot who died, 3 ships were destroyed. On her command ship, Admiral watched the impossible happen. The formation, which had been moving forward with unstoppable confidence, was falling apart. Ships tried to retreat, only to find human fighters appearing behind them. Commanders tried to give orders, only to die before their words reached their crew. "It's working," whispered. "My God, it's actually working." She opened a channel to the remaining conventional ships. "All vessels, push forward. The enemy is breaking. Push forward now." The human fleet surged ahead, striking at the confused and damaged ships. For the first time since the battle began, they were not just surviving. They were winning. But knew the fight was not over yet. She had counted the enemy ships. She had watched the commander's vessel, a massive dreadnought at the center of the fleet. It was too well protected for a normal attack. Its shields were too strong. Its weapons were too powerful. Someone would have to get inside those shields. She called through her radio, "I need you to cover me." "What are you planning?" asked. "Something stupid." She did not give him time to argue. She pushed her ship forward, jumping again and again, getting closer to the enemy dreadnought. Fighters tried to intercept her, and the remaining pilots created a wall of fire that kept them back. Reached the edge of the dreadnought's shield perimeter. Her drive was overheating. Warning lights flashed across her cockpit. She knew she had one jump left, maybe two if she was lucky. She thought about her family one more time. She remembered her brother's face, young and innocent and full of dreams. She remembered her mother's arms, warm and safe and full of love. She remembered her father's voice, strong and steady and full of pride. "I love you," she whispered. "I'll see you soon." She activated the full drive and jumped directly into the dreadnought's reactor core. The explosion was visible from Earth. The dreadnought broke apart in a cascade of fire and destruction. The blast took out a dozen smaller ships and sent shockwaves through the enemy formation. The commander died instantly, along with his entire command staff. For a moment, the battle seemed to freeze. Both sides stared at the expanding cloud of debris where the enemy flagship had been. Then they began to retreat. It started slowly, one ship turning and running, then another, then a dozen, then 100. The retreat became a rout. The once mighty armada fled from Earth's orbit, leaving behind the wreckage of thousands of their ships. On her command ship, watched them go. She wanted to feel joy, but all she felt was exhaustion and grief. 63 pilots had died in the battle, 63 heroes who would never see their victory. "Commander," her communications officer said, "they are broadcasting again." She expected threats or curses. Instead, she heard something she had never expected to hear from them. Silence, just silence, and the sound of running engines. "They're afraid," she realized. For the first time in 10,000 years, they're actually afraid. Landed his damaged ship in the hangar bay and climbed out on shaking legs. He was covered in sweat. His hands would not stop trembling, but he was alive. He thought about her final jump into the heart of the enemy ship. He had not known her well. They had barely spoken during training, but he would remember her for the rest of his life. "You did it," he said quietly, looking up at the stars through the hangar bay's shield. "You crazy, brave, beautiful person. You did it." Admiral broadcast a message to all surviving ships. Her voice was tired but warm. "Today we proved something important. We proved that humanity will not go quietly. We proved that we will fight, no matter the odds. And we proved that those who threaten us should be very, very afraid." She paused, and when she spoke again, there were tears in her eyes. "Rest now, repair your ships, hold your friends close, because tomorrow we start taking the fight to them." The sky above Earth was clear again. The stars shone down on a world that had refused to die. And somewhere in the darkness, they were running, carrying with them a new and terrible knowledge. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was something else entirely. 3 months passed after the Battle of Earth. 3 months of building, training, and preparing for what came next. They had retreated to their territory, and humanity was not going to let them rest. In the underground chambers of Project, Doctor worked without sleep. Her team improved the full drive technology, making it more stable and more reliable. The survival rate for jumps improved from 70% to 85%, then to 90%. It was still dangerous, but pilots no longer expected to die every time they activated their engines. New ships were built, new pilots were trained, and a new fleet was born. They called themselves the Sky Champions, after the 200 heroes who had fought in the first battle. The name spread across the galaxy, carried by survivors who told stories of ships that appeared from nowhere and brought death with them. Other species, long conquered by the Empire, began to whisper about the humans who had done the impossible. Fleet Admiral, promoted after her success in the battle, stood before her commanders and gave them their orders. "We are not going to wait for them to come back. We are going to find them, free the species they have enslaved, and show the galaxy that they can be defeated. This is not revenge. This is liberation." The campaign began with the system. There were an aquatic species, peaceful and kind, who had been conquered by the 500 years ago. There had been turned into a slave planet, its oceans harvested for resources while its people worked in terrible conditions. Captain led the Liberation Fleet. He was a serious man, quiet and focused, who had lost his younger sister when they attacked the colony worlds. Her name was, and she had been working as a doctor on one of the destroyed settlements, had accepted her death, but he had never stopped hurting. The battle for the system was short and brutal. The garrison was not prepared for an attack. They expected humans to stay near Earth, licking their wounds and waiting to be conquered. Instead, 50 Sky Champion ships jumped into their formation and tore them apart in less than an hour. When the last ship was destroyed, sent landing parties to the surface. They came out of their labor camp slowly, afraid this was some kind of trick. They had lived under rule for so long that they had forgotten what freedom looked like. A young child, barely a meter tall with shimmering blue skin, approached one of the human soldiers. "Who are you?" the child asked. The soldier knelt down to meet the child's eyes. "We're humans. We're here to help." The child tilted their head, confused. "Help? They said no one would ever help us. They said we were alone." "They were wrong," the soldier said. "You're not alone anymore." News of the liberation spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in centuries, conquered species began to hope. Rebellions broke out on a dozen worlds. Slaves turned against their masters. The empire, which had seemed invincible for 10,000 years, was starting to crack. But did not celebrate. He had received intelligence that made his heart stop. Some human prisoners were being held on a labor world called, and one of those prisoners might be his sister. "She's alive?" he asked the intelligence officer, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know for certain. The records show her ship was captured, not destroyed. She may have been taken as a prisoner." Did not hesitate. "I'm going to." Tried to stop him. The mission was too dangerous, was deep in territory, heavily guarded and far from any support, but would not be moved. "She's my sister," he said simply. "I thought I lost her. If there's any chance she's alive, I have to try." Looked at him for a long moment. She understood. She would have done the same thing. "Take your best pilots," she said. "Bring her home." The assault on was the most dangerous mission of the war so far. Led a team of 20 pilots through enemy territory, jumping past patrol ships and defensive stations. They lost 3 pilots to interceptors before they even reached the planet. But they made it. The labor camp was a nightmare. Thousands of prisoners from dozens of species worked in terrible conditions, mining ore and processing materials for the war machine. Guards patrolled with shock weapons, beating anyone who moved too slowly. His team landed under cover of darkness and fought their way through the camp. They freed prisoners as they went, arming them with captured weapons. By the time they reached the main prison building, they had an army of the rescued fighting alongside them. Found in a medical ward, she had been forced to treat wounded soldiers, using her skills as a doctor to heal the very creatures who had enslaved her. She was thin and pale, with dark circles under her eyes and scars on her arms from punishments. But she was alive. She whispered when she saw him, "Is that really you?" He grabbed her and held her close, tears streaming down his face. "It's me. I'm here. I'm taking you home." The escape from was chaotic and desperate. Reinforcements arrived just as team reached their ships. They had to fight their way into orbit, dodging fire from ground batteries and enemy fighters. Satin's cockpit, holding onto him as the ship shook from near misses. "I learned to fly," she said suddenly. Glanced at her in surprise. "What?" "In the camp, there were other pilots. They taught me. I can fly now." Smiled despite everything. "Then you can help me get us out of here." Together, the brother and sister flew through the enemy fire. Hands were steady on the backup controls. She had survived 2 years in hell, and she was not going to die now. They made it home. Back on Earth, Doctor did not live to see the liberation of. She died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the scientists and engineers who had become her family. She was 93 years old and had spent the last 40 years of her life working toward this moment. Attended the funeral personally. She stood before the assembled crowd and spoke about the woman who had saved humanity. Doctor never fired a weapon, she never flew a ship into battle, but without her none of us would be here. She gave us hope when we had none. She gave us a chance when all seemed lost, and she gave us the tools to fight back. She paused, looking up at the sky. They called us soft creatures. They thought we would break, but Doctor knew something they didn't. She knew that humans don't break. We bend, we hurt, we grieve, but then we get back up and we fight. That is her legacy. That is what she gave us. As the weeks passed, more species joined humanity's cause. They sent their best engineers to help improve the fold drive. A reptilian species freed from mining operations contributed their knowledge of enemy territory. The tall and graceful beings who had been used as servants in households provided intelligence about enemy plans. Watched the coalition grow with something that might have been hope. He had survived so many battles now. He had lost count of how many friends he had buried. But each victory brought new allies, new resources, new reasons to keep fighting. He stood before a holographic map that showed territory shrinking. 3 months ago, the Empire had controlled over 200 systems. Now they held less than 150. "They called us soft," he said quietly to himself. "They were wrong." In the distance, he could hear training with the new pilots. She had recovered from her time as a prisoner and had asked to join the Sky Champions. Her skills were not quite as sharp as the veterans, but her determination was unmatched. "I spent 2 years as a slave," she had told when she requested to join. "I watched them hurt people. I watched them kill people. And I promised myself that if I ever got free, I would make sure no one else had to suffer like that. Let me fly. Let me fight." Had approved her request. The war was far from over. The Emperor had consolidated his remaining forces and sworn to fight to the death. He called humanity the great threat and ordered his generals to show no mercy. But humanity was not afraid anymore. They had faced extinction and survived. They had discovered courage they didn't know they had, and they had learned that even the mightiest empires could fall. The hunt would continue, and humanity would not stop until the galaxy was free. 1 year after the first appeared in Earth's sky, humanity stood at the gates of the enemy. They called their planet Prime. It was a massive world, twice the size of Earth, covered in towering hive cities and ancient fortresses. For 10,000 years, it had been the heart of an empire that conquered everything it touched. No enemy had ever reached its orbit. No invader had ever threatened its soil. Until now. Fleet Admiral stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking at the planet through the main. Around her, a coalition fleet of 300 ships waited for her orders. 12 species had sent vessels to join the final battle. Humans, and 8 others who had suffered under rule. They had come together not for revenge but for justice. "The Emperor has refused our terms," her communications officer reported. "He says he would rather die than surrender to lesser creatures." Nodded slowly. She had expected this. They were proud to the point of madness. They could not accept that species they had conquered were now defeating them. "Then we give him what he wants," she said. "All ships prepare for final assault." The battle for Prime began with fire and thunder. Defensive platforms opened up on the Coalition fleet, filling space with plasma beams and missile swarms. Ships on both sides died in the first minutes, explosions blooming like brief flowers in the darkness. But the Coalition had advantages that could not match. 200 Sky Champion fighters jumped through the enemy formations, appearing and vanishing like ghosts. They destroyed command ships and weapons platforms, creating gaps in the defenses. The larger vessels pushed through those gaps, firing everything they had at the orbital stations. Led the fighter Assault. He had been promoted to squadron commander after the liberation of, and now he flew at the head of humanity's finest pilots. His ship danced through enemy fire, jumping from target to target with practiced precision. "Stay focused," he called to his pilots. "Watch each other's backs, we finish this today." Beside him flew in perfect formation. She had become one of the best pilots in the fleet, her natural talent combining with hard-earned experience. The scared prisoner who had been rescued from a labor camp was gone. In her place was a warrior. She said through her radio, "Enemy carrier at bearing 275. It's launching fighters." "I see it. Take your wing and hit their launch bays. Stop them from reinforcing." Peeled away with 4 other ships heading for the carrier. They jumped inside its shield perimeter and opened fire on the hangar doors. The explosion was massive, cooking off stored ammunition and fuel. The carrier began to list, then broke apart under its own gravity. "Carrier destroyed," reported, "moving to next target." On the planet's surface, the Emperor watched the battle from his palace. He was ancient, even by standards, his shell cracked and gray with age. For 300 years he had ruled the Empire. He had overseen the conquest of 100 worlds. He had truly believed, that no force in the galaxy could challenge him. And now his fleet was dying above his head. "Send everything," he commanded his generals. "Every ship, every soldier, every weapon, destroy them all." But there was nothing left to send. The orbital defenses were failing. The reserve fleets had been crushed. The Coalition ships were breaking through to the planet itself. Captain led the ground assault. His team landed near the Imperial Palace, fighting through waves of soldiers. The enemy fought with desperate fury, knowing this was their last stand. But his soldiers had come too far to fail now. "Push forward," shouted over the sound of weapons fire. "The palace is just ahead." They broke through the main gates and entered the palace proper. The building was ancient and vast, filled with treasures stolen from conquered worlds. Ignored all of it. He had only one target in mind. Joined the ground assault as reinforcements. His ship had taken too much damage to continue fighting in space, so he landed and grabbed a rifle. He found near the throne room, pinned down by heavy fire. "Need some help?" asked, sliding into cover beside him. Grinned despite the danger. "I thought you were a pilot, not infantry." "I'm whatever we need me to be." Together they pushed forward. Provided air support, her damaged fighter making strafing runs on enemy positions. Other Coalition soldiers joined them, a mixed force of humans and aliens fighting side by side. They reached the throne room doors, kicked them open and stepped inside. The Emperor waited for them. He was huge, even larger than normal, his ancient shell covered in ceremonial armor. In his 4 hands he held traditional weapons, curved blades that had killed countless enemies. "So," the Emperor said, his voice deep and cold, "you are the creatures who think they can defeat the. You are smaller than I expected." "Size doesn't matter," replied, stepping forward. "Heart matters, will matters, you never understood that." The Emperor laughed, a terrible clicking sound. "Heart, will, these are the words of the weak. The galaxy belongs to the strong, it has always been so. Maybe it's time for something new." Attacked. The fight was brutal and fast. The Emperor was old, but his skills had been sharpened over 3 centuries of combat. He moved faster than any creature his size should be able to move. His blades cut through the air with deadly precision. But had spent a year fighting for his species' survival. He had lost friends and comrades. He had faced death more times than he could count. And he had learned something important. Fear was just another enemy to be defeated. He dodged the Emperor's strikes and landed blows of his own. He used the throne room's pillars for cover. He waited for his moment. It came when the Emperor overreached on a killing blow, stepped inside his guard, and drove his blade deep into the joint between the ancient creature's shell and neck. The Emperor staggered, his compound eyes widened in disbelief. "This is not possible," he gasped. "Yes, it is," said quietly. "This is what happens when you underestimate someone." The Emperor fell. His body crashed to the floor and did not move again. For a moment there was silence, then put his hand on shoulder. "It's over," he said. "It's finally over." News of the Emperor's death spread across the military. Without their leader, the remaining commanders lost the will to fight. One by one, they surrendered. The war that had threatened to destroy humanity ended not with a final explosion, but with the quiet lowering of weapons. Broadcast a message to all forces. The Empire has fallen, the galaxy is free. Across the Coalition fleet, soldiers and pilots celebrated and embraced humans, sang songs of victory in their beautiful, flowing language. Species that had been enemies for generations found themselves united in joy. 1 year later, on the anniversary of the final battle, a ceremony was held on Earth. Representatives from 47 species gathered to dedicate the Galactic Peace Memorial, a massive structure that honored everyone who had fought and died for freedom. Fleet Admiral stood before the crowd and gave the dedication speech. She spoke about sacrifice and courage. She spoke about the unlikely alliance that had saved them all, and she spoke about those who had not lived to see this day. "We remember who flew her ship into the heart of the enemy to turn the tide of battle. We remember Doctor, who spent 40 years preparing for a war she hoped would never come. We remember the thousands of pilots and soldiers and ordinary people who gave everything they had so that others might live." She paused, her eyes moving across the crowd. "The believed they were strong because they conquered. They were wrong. True strength comes from protecting the ones you love. It comes from standing up when you want to fall down. It comes from refusing to surrender, even when surrender seems like the only option." After the ceremony, walked through the memorial grounds. She stopped to look at a statue of which had been placed at the center of the memorial. The sculptor had captured her perfectly, young and determined, with eyes full of fire. A small child approached her. The child had shimmering blue skin and large, curious eyes. "You are the Admiral," the child said, "the one who led the humans." Smiled and knelt down to meet the child's eyes. "I am, and who are you?" "My name is, I was born free because of you." Felt tears forming in her eyes. What a beautiful thing to say. Tilted their head. "I have a question. Were you ever afraid? When the came, were you afraid?" Thought about that night, over 2 years ago now, when she had watched the enemy fleet blocking out the stars. She remembered the despair that had threatened to swallow her whole. She remembered thinking that everything was lost. "Every single day," she admitted, "I was terrified." "Then why did you fight?" Looked up at the sky. It was blue and clear, filled with soft clouds and warm sunlight. Once, that sky had been filled with enemy ships. Once, it had seemed like the end of everything. "Because giving up would have been worse," she said. "Because there were people counting on me. Because even when hope seemed lost, I knew that as long as I was still standing, there was still a chance." She stood up and looked at statue one more time. "Fear is not weakness," she told the child. "Running away from fear is weakness. But standing tall despite your fear, fighting even when you want to run away, that is the strongest thing anyone can do." Nodded slowly, as if storing this wisdom for later. "I understand," the child said. "Thank you, Admiral." As the sun set over the memorial, stayed behind while the crowds departed, and joined her, and the three of them stood together in comfortable silence. "What happens now?" asked. "Now we build something new," said. "Something better. A galaxy where no one has to be afraid of being conquered. A galaxy where all species can live in peace." "That sounds like a lot of work," said with a tired smile. "It will be, but I think we're up for it." She looked at her friends, at the memorial, at the sky above them. Somewhere out there, new stars were being born. New worlds were waiting to be discovered. New stories were waiting to be written. They had expected humanity to break. They had expected soft creatures who would kneel before superior force. They had been wrong. When hope seemed lost, the sky had unleashed its champions. And humanity had stood tall.